what I thought I'd do today is to make a couple of cards, just give you some ideas on how to use the Postal Marks 3D embossing folder. I also said that I would use the nested scalloped and stitched rectangles. It's another one of those sort of workhorse sets that we have in our stash that Lisa has given to us. So I should be making good use of that. A straight DL card, so that you have the embossing folder in the back there. And I've used a selection of frames that are created with the nesting rectangle set there. And also this one, I've put it onto a square card, which is probably my favourite shape card to work with. So it just shows you that you're not restricted to the DL Slimline cards. Okay, so obviously if we're using our layering stencils, then we bring in our ever useful Ultimate tool. Okay, within this set, this particular stencil set, we have 3 stencils. We have the numbers on the top right hand corner. So just before you start the project, just make sure that all the numbers are in the same orientation, in the same place, so you know that the pattern will actually build as Lisa intended it. Anyway, so I'm starting off with the first stencil, and the colours I'll be using are Hickory Smoke and the blue. So the blue is the prize ribbon colour, and the red, I'm using the Abandoned Coral. So that comes out really real vibrant red. So I'm going to start off with the Hickory Smoke, and this really is just to set the tone for the other 2 colours really. So I really want just a light layer on this. I really don't want this to be as bold. So I'm really just going to layer on just a light layer of this. And it is, when I take this layer away, you see that it sort of really is quite light, but it really does come into its own when you start adding the other 2 colours. Now I'm using the largest of Lisa's stencil brushes, because we have a sort of a larger area to cover, and this makes that job a lot easier. So if we can take that away, I mean, that in itself is just a lovely background, I'd say. But as I say, this really comes into our own when we start layering on the blue. I'm using the normal distress inks. I find these are usually my first port of call when it comes to ink. I do have the oxides as well, and I love those too, but I find just the layering up of these regular original distress inks to be a lot easier. I find it easier to build the colour on these. So the first time round when I actually created this, I went too light on the actual with the ink itself, and it was a lovely effect. I'll just show you. It was really lovely with the pale, but it wasn't bold enough once I actually put this against the embossing folder and sort of started cutting into this. So I realised I actually need to go on quite heavy with this ink. I won't do the whole section actually, because I've already got pieces prepped. I just wanted to show you how this layered. Now, say I'm using the prize ribbon in the lovely blue, but any blue would work. So we take that away, and you can see straight away, even just the white and the blue and the grey, I think is just so stylish. And even with as it fades around the outside. And you can see now why I've used the grey as a non-colour, as I'd want to say, because although the white is picked out, you do want to have perhaps the detail of like the diamond pattern in there. I mean, it's entirely up to you. I think I would use that as it is. But obviously we have a third stencil, so why not go ahead and use it? So we just need to pick up our ink. And again, we want to go on really heavy with this. You saw the intensity of the blue. Other times I would go really pale and I would like sort of the airbrush effect. And other projects that technique works perfectly for, but I think for this we'd want a really solid colour. So we'll just layer that up, and you see that's a really nice vibrant red. This say the abandoned coral. There are other reds available. You could use festive berries, I think candied apple as well, I think. That's in the distress inks, obviously. We've got the excitement of Lisa's new inks coming out, I think on the 24th of August. So we've yet to see what colours she's bringing, but I'm sure there'll be something fabulous in there. So I'm just going to just do that for now, because I don't actually need to use this part. But when I take that away, you can just see how that has now built up. And you can see the effect of having the grey in there to actually give a physical side to the edge of those boxes. I just thought that was just really amazing. And say, looking at that on screen, it looks so 3D. Okay, so if we bear that in mind now, I'm bringing in this first card. We'll start off with our DL card. So I've embossed just Lisa's normal white, super smooth cardstock with the Postal Marks embossing folder, and I've just put that straight onto a DL card. Again, I like to keep a lot of white on my cards. I just think it's really nice and fresh, and I like to accent that with sort of colours on top. You could, of course, as I've done here, and I'll show you, you can run over the top with a stencil brush with some ink and just actually pick out colours of individual postmarks or of the entire card front. That's entirely up to you. To create the frames here, the nested frames, I'm using, this is what I've done earlier, so this is ended up to be really pale, but I think it's still quite nice. I've taken 1, 2, 3, 4 of the smallest nested rectangles from the set. I've actually just taped them together with washi tape just to make sure they all stay in position, because I actually want to cut little frames. And I think this is a really nice technique to show those who perhaps might be new to card making and die cutting. When you receive a nested set like this, the temptation and the immediate thought is to cut each of the dies individually, which is great, and that will allow you to get yourself a solid piece like this, which of design paper is perfect. But then you can start adding dimension and layers and creating frames like so. And to do that, you actually die cut multiple of the dies within each other. So I'm going to be able to cut all 4 of these at once, and I should do this on my small die cutting machine. Now I'll pass it through one way, and I will pass it through another just to make sure, but I'm very confident that that would have die cut perfectly for me. Okay, let's remove that away. Because I store my dies on a magnetic sheet, I do tend to keep these stuck together as well. And you can see now that we have our selection of frames just by layering and intertwining and just playing really, and just seeing what design you like the look of. Now I won't stick these down at this stage because I want to move on to the card afterwards, but you can see there that has created a really nice focal point. Now the advantage would have been, of course, if I had die cut this slightly darker design, that would have actually stood out a lot more against the embossing folder there. Now, to actually pick out the details of the embossing folder, I die cut my, no I didn't, I actually embossed the folder onto another piece of card, and you can actually take your scissors to this and actually start fussy cutting. Now this is the piece that I've already done, and I've cut out this postal mark here, which I want to use as a focal point. But you can just see there are, if you actually look at the design, there are postal marks that are actually sort of whole, and you can pick those out, and all you need to do is just take your scissors and just start cutting into these. They're very easy to do. You just take your scissors, just take your time. Because of the super detail with the embossing, it gives you a very clear outline, particularly on these ones, so you can see where you're going with it, and you can start creating your own embellishments. Now I'll take this triangle one also. Now, as part of the design, Lisa has actually created this as an off-the-page design, so make the most of that, and I shall show you in the second card. I will actually, although it looks irregular, I can make the most of that, so you really can pick out all the details from these embossing folders and make the most of them. And I think it's a technique that Dawn showed you the other week on one of her lives when she used the Happy Birthday embossing folder also. So I think once you've done it once with one embossing folder, you can start seeing the benefits of that technique. So I've taken one of these postal marks and I want to just highlight the colour against the white background. So I should bring one of my inks back in again, a coordinating ink. I should use the prize ribbon and use my stencil brush. Just pick up the ink on your brush and just gently just use a really light touch, and you can start just adding that ink, and the highest areas of the design will pick up the most ink, as you can see there. So that's really picking out all them fabulous details and really makes these postal marks come to life. And you can see now with a piece of 3D foam, I'd be able to place this anywhere on the design. I've actually used a sentiment from one of Lisa's craft stamp kits. It was the painted stripes texture, which has got some fabulous fonts and sentiments on them. I'll just show you briefly. It's this here. I really love this font. It's really sort of fun and playful and sort of really light-hearted. So, and this is the perfect size to actually be able to stamp that with. So I'm just going to use a black VersaFine. It's my favourite black ink to stamp the sentiments with. And I can just stamp that. It's perfect size. And we have a sentiment that we can use onto our card there. And we can see we have created our DL card. So that's the first one. I just want to go on to the second one for you. So using exactly the same techniques, exactly the same products, but just something a little bit different. So I wanted to use a square card, which is my favourite card size to use, and I have most of the card blanks in this size. And I just wanted to show you that we can actually cut down our DL embossed piece of card. I've got a piece of stenciled cardstock here, and I've die cut this with the nested squares. Now you'll notice actually, I'll just see if I can explain this to you briefly. This is how this piece of cardstock started off, and I've used one of the nested rectangles. It was this one to actually die cut that piece, but you'll notice it's actually cut in two, and I've still retained the stitched detail around the outside. Now, as it was, I thought that this rectangle was too big to go on the front of the card, and it was hiding too much of my embossed detail, and it was this that I wanted to have the star of the card. So I wanted this bit smaller, but I still wanted the detail of these stitched. So I'll see if I can explain this to you. This piece of card was die cut like that. Then to make this smaller, let me see, I've rematched the stitch design in the top of the detail, on top of the die, sorry. I've rematched it onto the top and it actually locks into place. I don't know if you've done this before, because of the depth of the detail of these stitch designs in Lisa's dies, it enables you to do this. You can actually catch the die back into some of that stitch design, and you can run that back through the die cutting machine. So that way you can actually cut down the size of your rectangle. So it's just a really useful way to carry on using the dies and still make them work for you, even though they may not be the exact size that you want. And this I can keep to use at another time. So now that to me is the perfect size, and you would never know that the die wasn't that size initially. So what I want to do now, I just want to cut the embossed piece of card to the same size as my rectangle there. And now I'm free to attach these to the front of the card. And by the time I've layered these two together, you'd never know that I'm using a Slimline embossing folder. And you wouldn't actually know that this wasn't the original size of the nested rectangle. As I did before, I fussy cut a lot of the details from another sheet of embossed cardstock, and I can begin layering these onto this pattern section. Now this is the postal mark that sort of goes off the page on the embossing folder, and I say you can make the most of that. So use it as Lisa designed it, and we can use that going off the page on our piece of design. And the same with this one here. This is also another off the page design, but it's taken a lot of the guesswork out. So basically you're just repiecing this embossing folder back onto a piece of cardstock. So, and it gives us a really lovely layered design. I can use another triangle piece here. And I think what I like about this particular way of doing it is that a lot of the design that we've stenciled behind really pops through. Okay, these pieces I'm actually going to 3D, so we do get some dimension onto that section also. I shall leave that at this stage. I should bring this one in, and you can see here that I've actually used the sentiment long distance hugs, so I think that works really well. But I think it's just a really nice way to use the Postal embossing folder, and hopefully I've given you a couple of ideas to actually get going with. Thanks so much for joining me this afternoon. I really enjoyed putting these together for you, and I was really pleased with the way that they've come out. So thank you for joining me. Hope you have a fabulous afternoon, and I look forward to joining you again soon. Thanks everyone.